Okay, the recording has started, and we're going to go ahead and get cracking here. Okay, the short passages. Last time we talked about long passages. Who remembers some things that we typed about long passages last time? In the text box, go ahead and type some things that we told you about long passages. See what you guys come up with in the text box. Anybody? Some of the lessons about long passages. Background info. Other people. Point. Okay, so point means we'll flesh these out a little bit. Structure, logic, point, tone. Yeah, those are good. Okay. Then we talked about two focus questions, which we're definitely going to hang on to those. So yes, excellent. And then anybody else? Anything else that we talked about last time? We're going to condense some of these into a summary here in a little bit. I see a couple of people are still typing. Yeah, what the facts do. The point is never just to inform, right? Okay, that's a pretty good summary. So let's go ahead and get that summary on the board. And then we'll see which of these things apply and which of them don't apply in terms of the longer passages. Because unfortunately, some of them will be true and others will not. So, things we learned about long passages last time. The first thing is that there's a regular structure. There's a very regular structure to the long passages, where you've got the first paragraph is a genuine intro paragraph, which almost always summarizes the main idea pretty cleanly and neatly. And then the body paragraphs have also their own type of structure, which is basically you have a topic sentence, and then the rest is a bunch of details, which are less important, and they usually just support the topic sentence. And then in terms of how to read it, you don't really have to concentrate on the whole thing. It's okay to read selectively and even to skip parts. We talked about how the main intro paragraph is very important. And we also talked about how the topic sentences are important. And then if there's a change of pace, if there's a focus shift or wrap up at the end, then that's important. And then lastly, we flip through some of the other things you guys are saying. What's going on with the sound feedback? Is anybody else having issues with the sound? If you are, go ahead and type in the box. Issues with the sound. Yeah, I am working on a netbook that has a keyboard that's very close to the microphone. So what's going to wind up happening when I type things is you'll hear some noise, because unfortunately it's a very small travel netbook and everything is kind of close to everything else. So I will do my best to minimize the feedback issues, but we'll have to deal with it when it comes to that. So, but is anybody having issues hearing me? If you are, tell me in the text box. If it's a little bit of interference from the keyboard, then we'll unfortunately have to just handle that. Okay, so For those of you who don't have sound, I don't really know what the deal is, but some of you are having good sound. Okay, and then when we talk about how to read it or what to read for, there's two focus questions that we talked about last time. The first focus question was, what's the point? Like, why are they telling us this stuff? Why is this here? What's the purpose? What is the author trying to achieve? The second focus question is if there are details or facts. And it's not so much if, it's an issue of when. Not if there are details or facts, but when there are details or facts. Why are these facts here? What do they do? And it's almost like a critical reasoning. Like, how do they address any claims that are present or implied? You know, because there should be some sort of element of an argument here. You know, it's as Andres pointed out, we're not just going to be listing a bunch of facts for your viewing pleasure. I mean, if there are a bunch of facts, they will be intended to make some sort of point. So you've got to figure out what that point is. And in a couple of passages that we're going to see, the way that it fits together is actually pretty much dependent on focus questions number 1 and 2. All right, now let's talk about, do these apply to the short passages? So, how much of this advice still applies to the short passages? Does anybody know, of the stuff on this screen, how much of this stuff still applies to the shorter passages? You're going to type in the text box. Which things do you think apply? Which things do you think don't apply? To people who are saying most or something like that, try to be specific. If you think all of it still applies, then you don't need to clarify that. But if you think there are some parts that don't apply and some parts that do, try to clarify that as well. Okay, we're starting to get in on it here. We're starting to zero in on it a little bit. It's not all of it. So for those of you who are saying all of it, it's not all of it. Yeah, you can't skip things anymore, and it's no longer a regular structure. So those of you who are basically saying that, you are correct. So the stuff about the structure, the facts about the structure of the passage are no longer true. And the thing that's unfortunate about short passages is that short passages don't have a regular structure. There's nothing you can say about the way that they're constructed that's going to be true in general without very frequent exception. So I mean, there are some things that are quite often true of short passages, but there's nothing that you can really say that is true all the time. So, for instance, normally, but not always, there's some sort of topic sentence at the beginning, but not always. And we'll see a passage today on which there's not one. Normally, in fact, I won't even say normally. I'll say many times. Because normally seems like more than half the time, and I don't even know if I could say that with much confidence. But many times there's some sort of topic sentence again. Many times there will be transition words, such as however, or but, or also, or furthermore, or any of those kinds of transition words, and those words that indicate logic. Furthermore. But not always. Etc. So what this means, since short passages don't have, also is a transition word because, transition words don't have to mean things are changing. Transition words are anything that shows you how two or more sentences fit together. Like if you say also, then you're having two things that are like each other or that make the same point. Whereas if you had however or but, that means you're going to be making the opposite point. So yeah, that's a kind of transition word. The transition words are anything that, I don't know if they're universally called that, but when I taught school, I called them that, and they were called that when I was in school. Transition words, basically words that indicate logic. But the fact that there's a lack of regular structure means that you can't skip parts of the passage anymore. So you can no longer bet on certain parts of the passage being more or less important than other parts of the passage. Whoever's messing with the board, please don't. In fact, let me just disable that. Okay. You can no longer rely on the importance of certain places in the passage. Instead, you actually have to go through the whole thing. So the process, there's much less of a process, but the process is basically this. You do actually have to proceed through the whole passage. But, and this is even more important now because you can't isolate any locations to concentrate on more. It's even more important that you focus exclusively on those two focus questions. So, concentrate exclusively on the two focus questions. And if you remember what those are, the two focus questions are what's the point, and if there are details, what are they doing there? So let's get this stuff upstairs so that we can get the focus questions to fit on the screen. My cut and paste is not working, so let's just retype the focus questions. The first focus question is what's the point? Or what is the author trying to argue? Argument is a good word to use here because these things really do have to be argument. Like the author actually has to be trying to make some point or another. Like if you, this is a good word to use because if you think the passage is just throwing a bunch of facts at you, then you won't be able to answer this question because throwing a bunch of facts at you is not an argument. So for people who fall into the bad habit of thinking the passages are just collections of facts, one thing that'll help you a lot is to use this word when you think about this focus question. You think about what is the author's argument, what point is trying to be made. And then the other point is not to get swallowed up in facts when there are facts or details. Why are they there? What arguments are supported or refuted by these facts or details? In other words, you're not supposed to really remember what the facts were, because you don't, at the end of the day, you don't really care. But you do care what those are doing as far as the way they affect the argument go. So this may be a little bit less than satisfactory for a lot of people who are looking for a formula. But basically, we're here to tell you that there's not a formula, unfortunately, for this stuff. It's just not formulaic. So the trade-off is you have less of a passage to deal with. You have a lot fewer words in the passage. But the trade-off for having a passage that has fewer words is that it's much more random and there's a lot less reliability to the way that it's structured. Smiley face if this all makes sense. Any questions, go ahead and type them in the text box, please. Otherwise, we'll start looking at some actual passages and making some sense of them. Okay. I don't see anybody typing, so I think we will go ahead and start looking at a passage. In particular, let's look at this one first. Okay. This is important. If you can't see this passage or if it's distorted on your screen, let me know. This passage appears in a text box, and on Illuminate, text boxes are sometimes different sizes, and they appear differently on different people's screens. So if a text box is not legible to you, then let me know. In other words, you should see a passage on the screen. It's basically one giant paragraph, yeah. In fact, yeah, this one is actually really just one giant paragraph. Some of these have paragraph breaks. This one doesn't. As far as the person who's asking about the level of the questions, it's really not something that's ever worth worrying about. With reading comp, there's no real distinction between questions that would be considered easier and questions that would be considered harder. The techniques that are used to answer them are not any different. So if a question is harder, it's only because maybe people have a little bit of a more difficult time finding the information. But the techniques are the same. So what we're doing today is applicable across the board. Okay. Remember what our focus questions are. So let's read through this and let's talk about what they're doing here. And remember what you want to do in order to find the point. One of the best ways to find what they're doing, what are they arguing, is to look for transitions. To find the argument, one of the best ways to find the argument is to look for logical transitions. So here are some logical transitions that are in this passage as we read through it. If they say traditional, why do you think they would do that? Like, not all transitions are words like however or furthermore or anything like that. Some transitions are things like traditional or people have said. So, okay, you guys are starting to get it. Text box, anybody has any other ideas? Argue against it, maybe, maybe not. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But yeah, it's a contrast of some sort. Yeah, argue against is maybe a little bit too specific. But yeah, there's gonna be a new view. So if they see traditional indicates that some sort of contrast is going to come up. Because otherwise there'll be no reason to say that. So either a new view or counter-argument. So good. Yeah, so that's basically what you guys are saying. So traditional social science models of class groups in the U.S. are blah, 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 blah. So let's talk about the notes we would take. Remember the notes, which are exclusively to answer the focus question. So to answer what's the point, and also to answer why are the facts here. So it's definitely worth writing down. It first presents the traditional model of class group. They are blah, 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 fact, 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 fact. The reason why these facts are here is just to describe what the traditional view is. So you don't so much care right now. You don't want to write it down. Here's a contrast. Some of these people, by contrast, have argued that it is instead based on. So you can pick up from this is going to be important. So this is a transition. So notice some people, by contrast, and instead. So there's your new view. So the feminist model says it's instead based on gender, which means that this must not have been based on gender. Even if you didn't pick that up, you can figure it out from the transition. So feminists said it's based on gender. And this was new. This was a new idea. This was not the transitional idea. So traditional model, new idea. We're starting to see a structure emerging here right in front of our eyes. Traditional model, new idea. Social historian Mary Ryan, for example, someone tell me what to do with that while you are reading this passage the first time. Good. Yeah, you can just skip it, or at least let your eyes kind of glaze over it, because it's just an example. It's an example. So you can say, for example, exactly what it means. These words are just going to be details. Supporting the new view. So you don't really care about them right now, but if they ask you a question about it, then you're going to care. Otherwise, you're not. Pretty much black and white. Same thing with a colon, same sort of thing. Colon also usually also means details to follow. So that colon is also a transition showing you that they're going to come up with examples. So blah, 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 blah. We don't care. We'll come back to it if we need to. Recently, though, recently is also a transition because it contrasts with traditional. Other feminist analysts have questioned this model. So notice there's just loads of transitions. We've got recently, we have a though, and we have a question this model. So that means we're going to get another new view. So we can get into the details of it later if we need to, but we can just say other feminists came up with yet another model. And then blah, 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 facts. For example, so more stuff that we don't so much care about right now. And then we're done. Any questions? Does this model point to the contrast? Well, questions this model does. Not this model by itself, but if you're questioning the model, then that means there's a contrast. Let me know if that makes sense. Does the author take sides? The author does not take sides. I mean, you can tell that when you see this kind of stuff, it's just these people said this, these people by contrast said this. For example, this person said this, these people said this instead. The author here is clearly not taking sides. Other questions that you guys have? Yeah, so Gaurav, you're right. There's no sides being taken here. It depends. The question is, do we have to read through the details or skip them? I mean, the words after, for example, I wouldn't bother with. At least not right now. If you have to answer a question about them, then that's different. But the issue with concentrating on those words is that they will throw you off of things that matter as far as the main idea goes. Because the examples are examples. Like, as far as the main idea is concerned, they just don't really matter. So, because they're examples. So, they illustrate the ideas, but they don't tell you what it is. As far as the tone, you will never have to come up with a word for the tone. I know that some of our old exams did ask for, like, what is the tone of this passage. The GMAT, as far as we've seen, has never actually done that. So you're not going to have to come up with a word for the tone. But sometimes they'll ask questions like, you know, the way this is written suggests that it's aimed at what kind of people. So you might have to think about the way it's written in order to answer those kinds of questions. But you're not going to have to specifically say what is the tone. Especially not of a passage like this one, because this passage is just totally neutral and it's just an analysis. So there's nothing interesting about the writing of this passage. It's not ambivalent. Ambivalent means, I mean, again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because you will not be asked to do that. Again, I promise you, you will not be asked to name the tone of the passage. It will not happen. But ambivalent means you actually have feelings both ways about something. Like, ambivalent means there are things that you think are good and things that you think are bad, or you approve and you disapprove. Yeah, it's like you go back and forth on it. So that's not true. It's like, ambivalent means you have to have two opinions that are in conflict. This author has no opinions at all. So it's not that. It's totally analytical. Anyway, this is really the only notes you would have to be taking. So that's about it.